history class with him, and I took global politics, and I took a second history class with him. And then I got one from my English teacher from 11th grade as well. And so both of those were essentially from like the social sciences, but that was perfectly fine, and that ended up getting me into the colleges that I got into. So what's important is not necessarily that like you do one math and one like reading, but what's important is actually that you have a good relationship with this teacher, that they know what type of a student that you are, and that they're able to write you like a good long letter that's not generic, but rather something that's like, it tells the schools who you are and who your personality is and what they can expect you to bring in the classroom later on.
Okay, the big question, the application essays. These are really overwhelming, and you really only will think about these practically like when you're starting to apply to colleges. So the college application window opens for seniors in August before their senior year. August 1st is when the Common App opens and when schools start accepting their early action, early decision, and we'll talk about that later. But that's when you have to start, and you should start thinking about this before, but that's when you really are, the application has that essay portion ready for you to go, and you have to start thinking, what am I gonna tell these admissions officers? What do I want them to know? They see the list of my extracurriculars, they see my grades, they have my transcript, and they see the classes that I've taken. But now it's about you putting your voice into your application. This is the only space where you can control like what they essentially see, right? So like your grades, you do your work and you try your best and you get the grades that you want, that's like a letter, right? But this is like where you can be creative, where you can talk about the things that you're interested in, where you can be really practical about like, this is the thing that I want to solve when I go to college. This is what excites me about your university, right? So the main thing is that you have two types of essays. That's the common application essay that I was talking about, which is the personal essay. And it's about pretty much anything that you want. Mine was a combination of like a lot of things. I talked a lot about Sudan, but I also talked about my interdisciplinary identity. I'm half Moroccan, and I'm very proud of that. So I talked about balancing these two very vivid identities that I have, and also talked about like what I was passionate about, and that includes a lot of like sustainable development and things like that. And I'm more than happy to talk about that after this if you guys are interested in it. But your college personal essay, it literally can be anything you want. I've read essays where somebody has started like talking about an Oreo cookie, and they made that branch out into like their entire identity, right? So it might seem funny, and it is funny, but like that's what people have used to be creative and actually like tell the admissions officers like what is unique about them, right? Or you can talk about like a club that you were a part of that really meant a lot to you, or like an experience that you had throughout your life that it formed your identity, or it helps you kind of navigate life, right? So there's not one right type of essay, which is something that I struggled with in the beginning. I struggled a lot with writer's block. Like I would just like open my computer and not know what to write, or I would think that there was a right way to write the essay. The answer is you'll only feel satisfied with your essay when you make it your own and you actually genuinely ask yourself, what do I want these admissions officers to read? So it should be like, you should have like a lot of components into it. Like you should talk a lot about like what this means into your present life and like what you're going to bring to the table in college. But like, again, it's really all that you want it to be. And there's a lot of support that you could get from your English teachers. Like I think my English teacher was a really big help in like throughout AP Lit, kind of giving us example essays and supporting us throughout that process. So your English teachers should hopefully support you. You can also ask a lot of upperclassmen, or you can even ask us like if you want us to read your essays, like what kind of impression it gives. So again, like there's so many resources on the internet and in your schools that can help you put that like essay together. It's a process. It's not going to happen overnight. Nobody has. I mean, there's people that might have done it, but like you will spend a lot of time on it because it's the most important essay that you have. And it goes to every single school you apply to. So this is like your standard essay. If you're applying for 10 schools, every single one of those 10 schools is going to get that essay. So you want to make sure that it's general and that it speaks to you. And then Reem will dive into like the supplemental essays and like the school-specific ones.
Yeah, and just like building a little bit more on the personal essay thing, it's really hard to write a personal essay because it's hard to figure out who you are as a person and boil that down to like 650 words, right? Like you are obviously, there's so many different aspects of your personality that you want to try and show. But again, we want to bring you back to this idea that like your application is going to be telling a story about yourself, right? So everything from the classes that you choose to take to your extracurriculars to your personal essay is all going to contribute to your personal story. So I've said before that like something that I was really passionate about is I cared a lot about politics, I cared a lot about like helping people and things like that. So that's what I ended up making my essay about. And so I spent the entire summer before my senior year trying to figure this out, and I would like start so many different drafts, and then I'd end up deleting them because I was like, no, this doesn't make sense, this is not what I want to write. And like your essay, it's a process. You're gonna find pieces of it at different times. Sometimes like an idea will just come to you. Like what I would do is I would keep like a notebook next to my bed, or like whenever I just thought of something, I would quickly write it down, and then that would be part of it. And then I'd continue building out these ideas until I had an essay. So for example, for my essay, what I ended up doing is actually I wrote about what I wanted to be at every stage of my life. So I started out from when I was 5 years old, and I was like, when I was 5 years old, I wanted to be like so many random things, like an astronaut and all these other types of stuff. When I got older, like from 6 to 12, I wanted to be a doctor, and then I wanted to be a journalist, and then I wanted to be like a humanitarian, right? So like so many different things, but it basically over time, it built out the story of who I was, what was the common theme in all of the things that I wanted to do throughout my life, right? And this is the essay that ended up working out for me. But I know so many other people who've written essays about different things. So like, for example, like let's say you love playing video games, you play video games a lot, you're at the top of a lot of leaderboards. You can literally write your essay about the video games that you play and how they teach you how to navigate real world scenarios, or how they're like an example of like a world or something like that, or like how it teaches you about how you can make the world anything that you want to be and you can contribute to it and stuff like that. There's so much that you can do with your essay, and so don't narrow it down to like, oh, I have to write about like wanting to be a doctor because colleges want to see me say that I want to help people. It doesn't have to be about that at all. It's really about who you are as a person and what you care about.
One more thing, just like a practical tip, if you're not a senior yet, the best thing I can recommend is just write. Like, I don't think right now, like schools are telling you guys to write enough. Like, write as much as you can. Practice writing. Pull up a computer and just write about a topic. Journal, whatever it takes, because you want your skills to be ready. The worst thing that could happen is that you get a really good idea, but you don't have the writing skills to actually write it when it's time, right? So what you guys should be doing right now, especially in your summer and throughout the year, write as much as you can. Like, it can look like anything, but like make sure you're building that skill over time so that when it comes time, like you're prepared to put together something really great. And I think like also like English, I know my English teachers would always be like, during the summer, our doors are open, our emails are open if you want like any support with anything. Talk to your English teachers about like ways that you can strengthen your writing skills, and read a lot too, because through reading you'll gain like a really big vocabulary, and you'll gain like a lot of tips on like sentence structure and like how to create a compelling story. So like make sure this is not something that just starts your senior year. This is something that from your freshman year you're building over time, right? So hold yourselves accountable and make sure that you guys are putting in the work from now, because I know a lot of you guys are probably not seniors yet.
And then just two more things here also is a lot of schools have writing centers, and your writing centers basically have like the best students in your English classes and stuff. Your school's writing center is literally going to go through your essay and work through it word through word and help you. They're like maybe like on sentence structure. If you're struggling even with starting your essay or finding ideas or anything like that, or putting it together, they will help you do all of that. It's the writing center, it's free, it's other students, so like very low stakes if you maybe don't want to show your teacher. So would highly recommend you take advantage of that. And then the second type of essays that we have are the supplemental essay. And so basically these are like shorter school-specific essays, right? So typically most schools will ask you on your application, like write in 200 or 300 words why you want to come to our school, or what will you contribute. And sometimes they ask you really random questions as well. Like they could be like, what's your favorite food to eat? And like explain to us why. Or like, what's your favorite activity? Or what sport do you really like? So they're super, super, random. There's a lot of different types of them. Some of them are optional, but I would highly recommend you take advantage of anywhere that you can to show what type of a person you are, to show what the things that you care about are, or like even the random things. So I remember for I think it was Georgetown University, I was writing my essays, and the last one was like, oh, like tell us something that people don't really know about you, or like something like that. And I was like, oh, when I'm stressed, I bake. And then I talked about how I love baking when I'm stressed, and I make cakes, and I make brownies, and I make all these different types of things, and how it helps me cope with that. And so they can be really random, but they're all parts of your personality, and sometimes just fun to write as well, and like less stressful than the personal essay.
Yeah. Oh, and one more thing before, there's some schools they give you the option to even create a video. So when I was applying to Chicago, they give you like 2 to 3 minutes if you can put a video together and kind of like show your face to the admissions officers. So that's also, if you think that's like a really good way for you to be creative, like there's a lot of schools that offer that option too. And I remember like I put together, like I put so much effort into this video. It was so much fun, and it made my college admissions process like a lot of fun, and I was able to like be really creative. So like there's a lot of ways that colleges want you to kind of show your interest and like show your personality. So if you feel like that's a great way for you, like look at schools that offer the option. I know Brown University also has that, and there's a bunch of other schools that probably do too, but the essays are the main thing, so that's just like an additional thing that you might find throughout your process.
And now we'll dive into like more of the mechanical process of the college applications. And so this is essentially how you apply. So there are three main ways or main platforms that you use for your applications. The most common one is called the Common App, and we also have like a deep dive into this in the next slide. But essentially it's used for over 1,000 schools, and it's where you'll add, what you do is you have this application portal, and to this portal you'll add all of the schools that you're interested in applying to. So for me, I think I applied to 10 schools. 8 of the schools that I wanted to apply to were all on the Common App. And so you fill out like all of this basic information that's all the same for stuff like it asks you about your name, your demographics, and all of these different types of things. And then it'll also show for every single school you're able to upload like your personal essay, you're able to upload the supplemental essays, so like the school specific ones that they ask and stuff. And so this is like a common platform that's used. And then there's something called the coalition application. So it's very, very similar to the Common App. It's just a different application system that some schools use for some reason. But you basically do the same thing. So for example, schools in this area that use the coalition app and not the Common App include like Virginia Tech and the University of Maryland. They both use the coalition app instead. So like if you're applying to those schools in addition to other schools like George Mason or UVA or whatever, you'll probably find yourself using both of those types of applications. Basically the same thing, just different platforms. Even the personal essay and all that stuff will remain the same for both of them. The only thing that will change is just the school-specific questions that they ask you. And then the last type of school is that some schools are like, choose to be intentionally difficult, and so they don't use either platform, but you just apply directly through their website. So an example of that in this area is Georgetown University. It doesn't use either one of these platforms, so you have to go through their website and create an account there, and then apply through their website to the school.
Yes, so the Common App will be your best friend in that first semester. So the Common Application is basically, they have simplified the process for us. Every school uses, like most schools use the Common Application. It's the most generally used one that colleges prefer. And basically we'll be able to, starting August 1st of your senior year, before your senior year starts, you'll be able to log in and create an account. And that's when you can start compiling the schools that you want to apply to onto your Common Application. You have the general part of your Common Application, which is basically like, your general questions, the transcripts, your personal essay, the stuff that's going to go to every single university. And then you have like the different branches for the universities that you want to go to, and that's where you're going to find the other questions that each specific university wants to know from you, and the different essays that they want you to submit. So that's also where your counselor will send your recommendation in. Like think of it like a hub. Everything happens there, and when you're ready to click submit, you're going to click submit, and it's going to turn green, it's going to give you confetti, and you're going to be done, and you won't have to think about it until the decision comes out. And just some other tips, let's see. Yeah, experiment with the Common Application as early as you can. On August 1st, before your senior year, you should make your account, and you should start getting really familiar with the system because you're going to be using it for months on end. And yeah, that's some practical tips.
The other thing too is that, especially for supplemental essays, sometimes colleges change those from year to year, right? So like the Common App essays, there's like 7 different so this is, we're talking about your personal essay. There's 7 different prompts that you can choose from, and like the last one is just choose your own. So just write about anything that you're interested in. So that one is easy to do from early on. But starting August 1st is when you're going to be able to see those school-specific questions, right? Like the schools, like those 300, 200 word essays or questions that each school is going to ask you. And so you'll want to get on the Common App as early as possible, because honestly, if you're applying to like 7 schools or 10 schools or whatever, you're gonna have a lot of essays to write. You'll have well over 20 or 30 essays to write. So you wanna get on there really early so that you can start writing those early, and you're not condensed to like when the applications are due in November or December or something like that.
Okay, the big question, how many schools should I apply to? when you apply to a school, you can get in or you cannot. So you want to make sure that you apply to the amount that's right for you. And what typically is recommended is around 7 to 10 schools. I personally applied to a lot more than that, but that was because I was also applying during COVID, and there was a lot of uncertainty about like applications in general. So to better position myself, I applied to about 19 schools. I don't really recommend that if you don't, because again, remember the circumstance, COVID, very uncertain time. But most people recommend applying to 7 to 10 schools, and you kind of want to bucket them into like these 3 buckets, right? So this all depends on asking yourself 2 questions. Number 1, what type of student am I academically? What are my grades like? What's my GPA? What am I involved in? Am I a really competitive student? Have I scored well on the ACT and the SAT? And then from 2, you'll go into what schools do I want to apply to? And that takes you doing research. When you research, for example, Harvard University or Duke University, you're going to be given some information like acceptance rate, typical range of SAT and ACT scores that are accepted, what type of student the school is looking for, and that can kind of give you an idea of, okay, for Duke University, is this a safety school for me? Is it a target school? Or is it a READ school, right? So typically, safety schools are schools with higher acceptance rates. So for example, like community colleges or schools like, it just depends on the person. Those are the schools that you know or you're pretty confident that you're gonna get into, right? That's like your backup, right? So that's super important. You should not ignore that because in the case that you don't get into your other schools, you have that, right? Then you have your target schools. Those are schools with like medium to kind of low acceptance rates. So think like 20%, 15%, maybe even 25%, 30%, right? So those are schools that like you think you can get into, but maybe not, so you want to shoot your shot. And then READ schools are like your top 10s, your Ivy Leagues, the big name schools. Those are schools that, honestly, even for people with 4.0 GPAs and really impressive stats, like for example, like our schools get like 50 to 60,000 applications every single year. That's a lot of students that are applying. So at one point, it's kind of like, you could be a really great student academically, but there's a lot of other things like what type of class do they want? Like, so it's like, these have really low acceptance rates. Like you're talking like 2 to 3%, 4%, 5%. So those are your schools that are REACH schools. That's where you're gonna put all your ambition into, right? When you have a balanced list of schools, you're best preparing yourself to make sure that you're giving your all and you're trying for the schools that you want to go to, but you're also making sure that you have a place to go when you graduate, right? So you don't want to apply to a bunch of REACH schools and not have any safety, because in the case that you don't get in, the reality is you won't have anywhere to go. So you want to make sure that, like, this is also going to take a lot of, communicating with your parents and talking with your teachers and your counselors about what the right list of schools looks like for you. And that's something that you should be doing your junior year and a little bit into your senior year, but as early as you can, look into schools, research universities, look at what makes universities unique. Duke is a big basketball school. If you like basketball, come to Duke. That's a great, that's a great way to kind of like see student life, what is it that you want in school, and that can kind of also help you put your list together. And you should also communicate a lot with your counselor. So I had a lot of conversations with my counselor about what the right list of schools for me was, especially during COVID, and when there was a lot of conversation about how difficult admissions would be that year. So I had a lot of conversations with my teachers to make sure that I was best positioning myself to get into the schools that I wanted to get into. Alhamdulillah. So
yeah, so Zeinab said most of it, but here's the thing about when you're creating this list, it's really important that you have that balance, because college admissions are honestly, you can give it your all. You can have a perfect 4.0 and a 1600 and say, oh, based on this, I'm going to apply to all the Ivy Leagues. And you still might not get into any of them, because college admissions are so random. It doesn't matter, you've done all of these things and you've given it your all and you've basically said, Bismillah, tawakkaltu ala Allah. But even after that, it's still, there's just so much that we don't know that goes into the process of how they choose who's going to come to these schools. So that's why it's really, really important to have these balance. Now, the other thing that I recommend is don't just apply to a school based on the name, because not every school is going to be right for you. You should do a lot of research into the schools that you want to go to, right? So research, for example, if you're applying to schools that are further away from this area, research what that area is like. Is it a city? Do I need a car? Do I need a car to get around to different types of places? Can I get around easily? What is the campus environment like? What is the surrounding city environment like?
Or like, what are the schools? Are there a lot of Muslim students? Like for me, that was something that was really important. Are there a lot of Muslim students at this school? Do I see a lot of people who like wear hijab at this school? Because I don't want to be the only one. Like stuff like that. This was all stuff that's going to impact what your life is like once you're actually at college. Or like if you want to apply to schools closer to home, there are so many that are in this area that are really great schools that I would highly recommend you visit. And here's the other thing too. Once you're in your junior and senior year, there are two things that you can do to sort of get more familiar with colleges. One, you could actually go and visit the school. So for example, like George Mason University is really close in the area. The University of Maryland is like pretty close. George Washington University, Georgetown University, all of these colleges have information sessions. You just need to go and take a look at when they are. Like search up on their website and it'll tell you, oh, we have college information session for people in these years from this time to this time and on this day. And they're typically on weekends, and so you should be able to attend. The other thing is if maybe like these schools are further away and you don't want to make the drive, is that a lot of these people come to these schools. So like they'll have recruiters come from these universities to your school. So I remember my school had like a ton of them. There were people who came from George Washington. There were people who came from like Johns Hopkins, which is further away. There were people who came from UVA and Virginia Tech and all of these schools. And they'll come to your school and they'll give you a session, and your counselors, and this information will also be on like your school website, and your counselors will tell you about it. But they'll give you all of this information, and then you can ask them as many questions as you want. You can ask them about what financial aid looks like. You can ask them about like, let's say that you're really interested in a certain type of extracurricular and you can't find that information on their website. Like, do you have a recreational soccer team, for example? You can ask this recruiter. They will probably know the answer to that question, and they'll be more than happy to talk to you. The other thing too is that it shows that you're interested in the school. And sometimes, not all the time, they'll like write down the names of these people, and so it might give you even like a little extra boost on your application as well, because they see, oh, this person is really interested. They came and they visited our school, or they came to an information session that we held for them. And so all of these things are really, really helpful for NDM choosing which colleges you're going to apply to. And even after you get into college, it's the same thing. Visit the schools, talk to people who are there, learn what it's actually like, and pick the school that's right for you.
Yeah, and another thing, like the big question of like money, that's a really tough thing to think about. And like for my family, I'm the first in my family to like go to college in the United States, and like my parents had no idea like what financial aid looked like. We would see the price tags on universities, and it'd be like these crazy big amounts. You have to also do research on like the financial aid of that university. So Harvard is a really good example, and Duke kind of like schools that give excellent financial aid, and they make sure that you're able to afford coming into
Like two more.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but that's also something that you should look at when you're kind of positioning yourself like, what's my reach school, what's my safety school? Make sure that you're also thinking about money, and you've had those conversations with your counselor and with the admissions officers that come to your school.
And the very last part, I'm sorry, we know that we're over time, but there's kind of a lot to cover. So the very last part here to talk about is actually that these like college applications are not free. Unfortunately, every part of the college process costs money, and application fees are not cheap either. So it can cost like between $60 to $100 to apply for one school, and then you'll have to do that for multiple schools. To send you to take the SATs, it costs money. To send your transcripts to school, it also costs money. So you want to factor this into your decision. If you are eligible for free and reduced lunch, or if you are considered low income, or even for some schools, like if you like make like an income under $80,000 or under $100,000 a year, you could be eligible for a fee waiver, which basically means that you apply for free to these schools, right? So make sure you look into that. Talk to your counselor, or like even Google on the school's website, Google online, and figure out, does this school have a fee waiver or not? Because that's gonna save you so much money in the application process, and it's really, really, really important to research into, especially as we like end up talking about the price tag that's actually on going to college and stuff.
Okay, this can be really confusing. There's different windows when you're applying, right? So you can apply to a school. The two main branches that you want to think about is early or regular. Early means November, regular means January, right? In terms of early, that breaks into two things. You have early decision. Early decision means that if you apply to that school and you get in, you have to go. There's no option. So for example, Duke University and a lot of other big universities have the early decision programs. They're binding, so you only apply to it when you're confident that this is the school that you want to go to, and there's no other option for you, like this is your dream school. I personally didn't do that just because there was, again, during COVID, a lot of uncertainty, and I also preferred to have the flexibility to choose the college that I wanted to. So like, you know, once I got all my acceptances, I went through the process with my family of talking about what I wanted and like what was right for me, and that's how I came to the decision of Duke. But highly, like, in terms of if you're gonna apply to early decision, really think about it. It does give you a higher chance slightly of getting in. It depends on the school because you are making clear to the university that you're committed to them and that they're your number one priority. But it's not something that's right for every family, and especially considering financial aid and things like that. And then early action, which is the program that Harvard has, and she can talk a little bit about that. But the difference is that it's not restrictive, meaning you can apply to a lot of early action schools unless they say they're restrictive early action. That's what Harvard is. So it means that you can only apply to Harvard Early Action. That's a private school. When I'm saying all this, it's private schools. So Duke and Harvard are both private schools. Virginia Tech, UVA, George Mason, those are public schools. So these categorizations really exist for private schools. So you can apply to, for example, Harvard, and then at the same time apply to UVA and VT because those are public schools, but you can't apply to Harvard and Yale both early. That might seem confusing, and it'll be clear as you kind of like go through the process, and it's a kind of a lot to swallow, but the main branches you want to think about are like early decision, restrictive. I love this school, I will go to it. Early action, restrictive early action, I'm interested in this school, I really like this school, but like I can make the decision at the end of the day if I choose to go here or not. And then regular decision is where all the chaos happens.
Yeah. And so honestly, I would not recommend that you apply to any school's early decision just because, like, essentially, if you get accepted, then you have to go no matter what. So there are some people who apply early decision because this is their dream school and they end up getting their financial aid packages and then they find out that it's like $40,000 or $50,000 a year that they have to pay. You have to pay that. Like, you have to go to the school. You've made this commitment. You have to go. You can't back out of it. And so you're going to be tied no matter what. And so it becomes really hard. It also becomes really hard to negotiate with schools like on this basis if you're trying to lower what your financial aid contribution is and stuff. Then early action and restrictive early action. So I did a lot of these. I told you I applied to 10 schools. I actually applied to 5 early action and 5 regular in the regular decision round. And so what I did for early action is I applied to Harvard, which was restrictive early action. So that was the only private school that I applied to by like November 1st. And then for 4 other schools, they were all public. So like George Mason, William and Mary, Virginia Tech, UMD, those are all examples of public schools. And so I applied to a bunch of them in the early action round. And then the regular decision round, which is like typically due by December or January 1st, I applied to like 5 other schools. And then you get all of your decisions back. So the good thing about early action or early decision is essentially you get your decisions back earlier than everybody else. So the really weird thing for me is that the first school that I actually got into was Harvard, and that was in December because they released their applications early. So that's before a lot of people have even applied. So that's why people like to apply like early action or restrictive early action to schools that they really love because it gives you a slightly higher chance of getting into that school than if you apply in the regular round. So like the schools that I was really wanting